Andrew Jackson was elected to the White House on a wave of populism, beloved by the common man. And those regular Americans who elected him wanted to show their appreciation. One man got wind of Jackson's love of good cheeses and decided it'd be only fitting that the president be awarded not just any old cheese, but the largest cheese in the world. And dairy farmer Colonel Thomas S. Meacham of Sandy Creek, New York, set about making one for him in 1835. Meacham's labor of love resulted in a gigantic wheel of cheese that was 4 feet in diameter, 2 feet thick, and weighing nearly 1,400 pounds. He wrapped this thing in a giant belt inscribed with patriotic inscriptions like, "The Union, it must be preserved," and such. Meacham proudly unveiled his cheese at an 1835 patriotic celebration in Oswego, New York. All the locals oohed and awed at Colonel Meacham's masterpiece. Then the good colonel loaded the cheese wheel onto a boat and sent it on to Washington, D.C. for Old Hickory to enjoy. Also on board was a puny 750-pound cheese meant for Vice President Martin Van Buren. The giant wheel of cheese, let's just call it Cheesy for short, okay, arrived in Washington and was delivered to the White House. President Jackson was grateful for Cheesy. After all, he liked cheese. But he was at a loss as to what to do with this much of the good stuff. So he started doling it out to his friends and acquaintances in huge chunks. 2 years later, and running out of friends to pawn pieces of Cheesy off on, Jackson began to get a little concerned. His second term was going to run out, and he still had a massive block of cheese. Not only that, but the thing was, like all good cheeses, ripening with age. While that may be a good thing for a cheese connoisseur, well, it's not so good for the home of the president. You see, Cheesy was beginning to emit a pungent odor, shall we say. In fact, this odor was so bad that folks living throughout what's now downtown Washington were privy to it day and night. One neighbor to the White House dubbed Cheesy an evil-smelling horror. And that odor was certainly not one that President Jackson was wanting to take back to the Hermitage with him. Whatever was he going to do with this stuff? Then it hit him. Why not have a going-away party, so to speak, and serve Cheesy to the guests? So Old Hickory set up a public reception at the White House and invited the common man, his voters, to partake of some fine fromage. 10,000 people showed up at the White House, hungry for some free food, and they attacked Cheesy with a vengeance. Within a matter of a few hours, Cheesy was no more, and Andrew Jackson was able to breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the remnants of the gigantic wheel of cheese were not going to be making the return trip to Tennessee with him. Only one problem. Remember that 750-pound cheese for the vice president? Let's call that Little Cheesy, okay? Well, it had arrived at the White House too, and Jackson had simply placed it in the basement. So the stink was still there. Not to mention the remaining smell from Cheesy, which permeated the curtains, the furniture, the carpeting, and, well, everything else in the White House. So even though Cheesy was gone, Cheesy was not forgotten. Plus, Little Cheesy was still there, but that was the new president's problem, the new president being the old vice president, Martin Van Buren. And how did President Van Buren finally get rid of Little Cheesy and that god-awful smell? In 1839, he held a charity auction that raised money for a good cause and got rid of the last bit of Colonel Meacham's well-intentioned gift. Incidentally, this wasn't the only time that someone gave a president a giant cheese. The town of Cheshire, Massachusetts gifted a 1,234-pound cheese to President Thomas Jefferson in 1802 with the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God," stamped proudly on it. The Cheshire cheese stayed with President Jefferson for 2 years and was featured in a 4th of July celebration in 1803, but was replaced with the Mammoth Loaf, a giant loaf of bread made by the U.S. Navy. And folks, that's the story of Andrew Jackson's giant wheel of cheese, another story that makes up the history of this place we call home. Be sure to subscribe to the Stories channel. Also, ding that bell so you get notified whenever we have a new story out. Give us a thumbs up too if you don't mind. You can also find our audio podcast at storiesofappalachia.com. Thanks for watching. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.